The cannabis community includes a diverse set of activists and nonprofits working to end the prohibition of marijuana. We take the time to hear the stories of reform on the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Community Chat.
Welcome back, everybody. Half past the hour, and joining us on the telephone from the National Cannabis Industries Association, we have Betty Aldworth on the line. Betty, welcome to the show.
Hey, Russ, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here because you're one of the experts I really wanted to talk about. You were very instrumental in the campaign to get Amendment 64 passed in Colorado, and I was wanting to get your take on how things have gone so far in its implementation.
Well, Russ, as you know, we won't see actual stores here open in Colorado until January 1st, but it looks like we're on track in Colorado to see that happen in early January.
Excellent.
In the meantime, though, we've developed a pretty extensive set of rules and regulations to run those shops, and people are getting ready for that process. And in the meantime, no one in Colorado over the age of 21 is being arrested for use or possession of less than an ounce of marijuana. So that's a big victory.
That's, of course, the best news of all. Now, you spoke of the rules and regulations that are being promulgated and worked on there for the industry. Can you give us a few examples that the industry people in Colorado are going to have to abide by?
You know, I'm not really intimately involved with the development of the rules themselves. I'm working more on federal policies at this point. But I do know that a lot of those rules are very similar to what we've seen for medical marijuana in Colorado. So extensive security in facilities, background checks for operators and other ways to ensure that, criminals and cartels aren't involved in legitimate business, as well as, lots of detail about how these businesses can operate and what it's going to cost and what the limits are to those operations.
Is that going to include, to your knowledge, any restrictions on advertising?
That's a great question. I have to assume that that's the case. Generally, a lot of the rules and regulations that are coming out across the nation related to adult use or medical use of marijuana do have some sort of restriction on advertising. Whether or not that's a good idea is obviously a hotly debated question.
Yes.
But, what I can say as a person who is a strong advocate for normalizing marijuana in American culture and recognizing that it's safer than alcohol and ought to be treated similarly is that, one of the really important things I think we need to do as an industry is be as responsible as we possibly can in our advertising by not creating ads that appeal to children, by not being, insulting to women in our advertising, things along those lines.
Do you think
but
that's
there's
something...
a lot of room to do great, cutting edge advertising.
And I'm wondering, is that something that NCIA is advocating for, trying to get these industries to self-police themselves with regard to the taste of their ads and the appeal of their ads?
Yeah, so NCIA does a lot of work around educating people, business owners, investors, entrepreneurs, and the like, on how to be responsible operators in their system. We bring in experts across the nation to talk about the various applications of the law in those states, and we also bring in experts on marketing and public relations to talk about how you can build a strong brand even within limited advertising space, and how you can build a strong brand without using offensive or otherwise inappropriate imagery. So that's something that we provide. Absolutely.
Excellent. Now, I want to talk to you about federal policy since you're working on that. But real quick, we do have a question from our live chat room. Howdy, you all wanted to know what the rules are or will be for cannabis tourists in Colorado. Any difference?
I think that if I remember correctly, people without a Colorado state-issued identification will have to purchase smaller amounts of marijuana, but it's not egregious. I distinctly remember that it was something that was that seemed reasonable. So if you're coming to Colorado, you're an adult 21 and over, you can walk into one of these stores after January 1st. You can make a purchase just like a Coloradan would, perhaps in a smaller amount, and you can use marijuana privately just like a Coloradan would be able to.
Absolutely. And
yes, please come visit.
If I remember correctly, it was something like a quarter ounce for the tourists and a full ounce if you lived there. Whatever the amounts are, it was less for the tourists. But it did not change the fact that you're allowed to possess up to that full ounce.
Right. That's exactly true. It is a constitutional right of any adult in Colorado to possess and use, of course, up to an ounce of marijuana or marijuana products.
All right, let's talk about the federal policies. The big news that's happened recently, of course, is the judiciary hearings and Eric Holder, our Attorney General, saying, on one hand, that we wouldn't prosecute or use mandatory minimum sentencing by redirecting prosecutors to not file charges in a certain way. And of course, the big memo on August 29th saying that so long as Colorado and Washington and the other medical marijuana states create programs that follow 8 federal guidelines, they're not likely to interfere. Let's go with that last one first. How much stock and trade do you put into the promises of the Attorney General, especially after the 2009 Cole memos with respect to, or Ogden memos with respect to medical marijuana?
I think it's only prudent to be cautious, and let's not forget that, you know, when someone is getting involved in this industry, or even as a consumer, either a client or a patient or an adult consumer in Colorado and Washington, we are still breaking federal law. That being said, the American appetite for punishing people for using marijuana is gone. There's no question about that. And given that, the Justice Department seems to be acknowledging that the best way to keep this product out of the hands of criminals and cartels, stop enriching them, and start realizing some real public safety benefits is through regulated markets. Do I think that the Justice Department is really excited about this idea? No. But in states like Colorado, Arizona, and others where we see very tightly regulated markets, we also see a very limited amount of federal interference. And finally, for the first time, the Justice Department has very specifically outlined the eight boundaries within which we must all operate. If we can manage to do that, then I think that we can, you know, we have more. We can rest a little easier. We can breathe a little easier. Is it perfect? No. Is our work done? Not by any means. But I think that as long that the Department of Justice has finally given us some clear boundaries, let's stick within them. And I suspect that for the most part, we will find a positive result.
We're speaking with Betty Aldworth from the National Cannabis Industry Association, and you're in Denver, Colorado. Is that right?
I'm based in Denver, yep.
Excellent. And could you give the website for NCIA for folks if they want to get some more information on your organization?
Sure. We've got tons of information at thecannabisindustry.org.
Excellent. Thecannabisindustry.org. Check that out. Now, maybe it's just too many years of reporting too many people being busted, and I've become too cynical, but when I read the memo from August 29th, and a couple of the points in it were that we had to work to discourage interstate trafficking and to keep marijuana out of the hands of minors. And I stopped to think that, you know, even a teenager in a dry county in Oklahoma can get his hands on a beer if he really tries. So are these guidelines just setting us up for failure so the feds can then come in and say, well, we told you so?
Well, listen, Russ, I mean, a teenager in Oklahoma can also get his hands on marijuana. And that's always been the case. So I think that the Justice Department, just like anybody else, recognizes that there's some margin here for human behavior. And I mean, they must, right? They know as well as anybody that marijuana is readily available for youth and adults across the nation. Otherwise, they wouldn't be, they wouldn't be taking the stance that they're taking now. I think that it is incumbent on industry to make sure that we are doing everything we can to educate consumers about the possible ramifications of things like illegally crossing state lines while carrying marijuana, or diverting to youth. What we've seen in places like Colorado is that with a regulated market, youth use actually declines. And, our argument throughout the campaign, and my strong belief still, is that regulated adult use market in Colorado is going to lead to further decline of youth use of marijuana in Colorado. And I think that, if any reasonable and honest look at data after a handful of years is going to recognize that, sure, of course kids are still using marijuana because that's what they do. But perhaps it's less, and let's be honest about the positive effects of this regulated market. In a few years, I think that ultimately we're going to find a net social good.
Yes.
And I hope that the Justice Department recognizes that too. And again, of course we have to be careful. We looked at the Ogden and Cole memos in 2009 and 2011 and, thought that there were reasonable assurances, but there are still people being punished across the nation. We always have to be wary and always have to recognize the risks.
All right. And I wanted to ask this question. We did a story today coming out of Arizona where dispensary owners, medical marijuana dispensary owners, were wary of the legalization campaign being kicked up by Marijuana Policy Project, basically fearing the threat to their bottom line. We saw this kind of opposition to legalization going back to 2010 from dispensary owners in California who were lining up against Prop 19, and in 2012, dispensary owners in Washington state lining up against I-502. Does NCIA have a way or a guideline or something to try to heal this rift between what seems to be medical dispensaries that end up opposing legalization campaigns?
We don't take any position on specific state initiatives because we work on helping people become better operators after a state law has passed, and helping them improve their effectiveness and sustainability and responsibility once the industry is in place in the state. That being said, we also firmly believe that a regulated marijuana industry is preferable to an underground market, and that's an argument that you'll hear NCIA making frequently. Of course, any dispensary owner is welcome to take whatever position they want, but I think that there's been, and perhaps I'm being naive here. In Colorado, we had a great deal of support from industry when we were working on Amendment 64. And in Washington and even in California in 2010, it seemed like the opposition was limited to a handful of extremely vocal, extremely media-savvy people who were able to generate interest that went perhaps that was larger than their numbers. In fact, I haven't read that article yet, although I am familiar with it because a dispensary owner from Arizona sent it to me just a few minutes ago saying, I spoke with this reporter for 45 minutes telling her how excited we were about the possibility of reaching more people with this healing herb. So it's hard to say what the real viewpoint is of every operator of these facilities in Arizona, in Washington, in Oregon, in California. But I think that we would be wise to take articles like this with a grain of salt.
All right. Well, thank you for that perspective. Betty Aldworth from National Cannabis Industries Association. You can check them out at thecannabisindustry.org. Thank you for all your hard work, and we'll see you in Denver in October.
We'll be right back after these messages from our 420-friendly sponsors. Support these advertisers because their ad money goes straight to the Russ Belville Show.
All right, when we come back, more Boston Freedom Rally video with my pants.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.